Investment in Australian business is at its lowest point since the mid-90s, and industry is claiming we are in the grips of an investment drought. Opportunities are presenting themselves. The decarbonisation of energy markets and the strengthening of international ties does open up new avenues for investment. But leading business voices say more needs to be done by government. Joining me live now, Business Council of Australia CEO Jennifer Westacott. First of all, the drought that we're in at the moment, the business investment drought, as you put it, Jennifer, how do we get here?
Well, we've gone here through a whole lot of things, uncompetitive taxes, high regulation, high cost to business. But what our report shows, Laura, is that we've got an investment drought, lowest it's been for 30 years, more money leaving the country than coming into the country. And what that means, it's bad for wages, it's bad for living standards, it's bad for the revenues of government. What our report shows that if you got investment going again, you drive productivity, which is the only way you can sustain wage increases by better equipment, better training, better expansion of businesses, and the dividend for the country from something as simple as what we're calling for, a 20% investment allowance, would be $8 billion extra a year in investment. The economy over a decade would be $17 billion permanently stronger. That would mean about $3 to $5 billion extra in revenues for government, but more importantly, for every Australian worker, on average, about $750 extra a year. Now, if we don't do this, Laura, we're not going to get the clean energy future. We're not going to get the industries around AUKUS. We're not going to make the transitions we need to make. We're not going to get manufacturing going again. We can't compete. I was in India last week with the Prime Minister. Time after time after time, people kept saying it is not attractive to invest in Australia. Tax isn't the only thing. High regulation, policy uncertainty around things like energy. We have got to sort of really take control of those levers. But the one lever we could control now in this upcoming budget is to give a 20% investment allowance. The only other thing I heard last week is the Americans are just sucking money out of this country, out of countries around the world, through giving these huge tax breaks for clean energy investment in the United States. What we're hearing is companies just sending their money there. Australian superannuation bodies setting up offices there. We have got to turn this around, Laura.
Okay, so you mentioned you're in India with the PM last week. If we could just delve a little deeper into what people were saying to you time and time again, that Australia is just not attractive to invest in. That's pretty shocking. We've also always heard time and time again from both sides of government that we are an attractive destination, but you're saying that's not the reality?
Well, I think, in some areas it is, for things like critical minerals, and obviously people, purchase our iron ore and things like that. But what we hear time and time again is that it's hard to do business in Australia, and that's not just from international companies, that's from Australian companies. And when, companies look at the way they allocate capital, they look at Australia and they see a very uncompetitive tax rate, they see a high cost of regulation, and then they look at something like the US at the moment, and they see these huge incentives for clean energy projects. Now, if you're a company, you've got to weigh those things up, and so it becomes more attractive to invest in other destinations. So, people say to me far too often, it's too hard to do business in Australia. And we are a small country, and we have to have bigger incentives for those multinational companies to come and partner on things like hydrogen, partner on things like critical minerals. We've got to actually unleash the potential of our country. But we've got, if an investment is holding us back, we've got to unleash it.
Where is the balance, do you think, between Australia being a huge supplier of cleaner coal to India, helping pull, many out of poverty, get that cheaper electricity that they need, but also being at the frontier, the new frontier of clean energy? Have we got that balance right? Is that easy to do?
It's not easy to do, but I think we've got the right policy settings that we can actually get there. And we've got to do both. And I think this idea that it's one or the other, we've got to make sure that we're part of the economic future of countries like India. And that was a big message that came up from Indian businesses last week. We've got to make sure that we're at the cutting edge of that clean energy future. We've got to be investing in hydrogen, in green steel. We've got to be decarbonising our manufacturing sector.
Sorry to interrupt. There's some teals at the moment in the New South Wales election, for example, are calling for a ban on all coal exports. I mean,
I just don't think it's realistic.
Yeah,
I've not seen any modelling, Laura, of the government, of Reputex, of modelling we've done that says that this clean energy transition can be done by, removing coal exports or getting out of gas. Certainly, coal as a source of power domestically will fade out over time, but gas is there for a long haul. I just think we've got to be realistic about this. This is about lowering emissions. This isn't about taking out a particular industry, and we've got to see ourselves as part of a global solution here, and we've got to make sure we've got the policy setting right, that we decarbonise our economy, but we've got to keep our economy growing strongly. And I do believe that we've got to strike that right balance, because if we don't, we're not going to be contributing to the well-being of other countries, but more importantly, we're going to make stop-start decisions in Australia that are just going to actually slow down our decarbonisation.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you've gone from India to Canberra, and Canberra is talking about the safeguard mechanism this week. Where is that up to, and what is your message to all involved here?
Well, obviously, it's the subject of a lot of discussion with the crossbench. My message to all involved is let's pass this bill. This is a very simple piece of legislation before the Parliament today, creating a new class of assets that will allow the safeguard mechanism, the mechanism by which you incentivise companies to invest in more emissions-efficient technologies and means of production. This is a very simple bill about creating a class of assets that make that easier. Once again, we sort of feel like we're in the 2009 stuff where people want a whole lot of stuff, which, sure, we should, at some point, as we get this going, start to do the things that Ian Sharp and others have talked about. But let's not hold this bill up. Let's get some momentum, because one of the other things that our report on investment shows today, that one of the killers of business investment is lack of policy certainty. The government's got a very simple bill before the House. Let's pass it and let's start to work through the other more complex issues along the way. No one's saying those issues over time don't have to be sorted, but we keep doing this all the time, Laura. We keep holding basic legislation hostage to really, really big agendas that are just not practical at this time.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Even if the crossbench do pass this bill, the coalition have dealt themselves out saying no, just a blanket no. That means into the future, the climate wars that we've been going on for 20 years about continue.
Well, we're going to work constructively with the coalition. I mean, they have to obviously talk about what their alternate policy is, but the fundamental message is this. The government's architecture is, in our view, the right architecture. The safeguard mechanism is actually coalition policy. We thought it was the right mechanism. We think what the government's put out is difficult, but our companies tell us that they can do it. Let's stick with that framework. Let's get it done. Let's get some momentum so that we can get this big investment change happening, and then at the same time change the macroeconomic settings around tax and regulation to drive that investment back into this country, not into having all this clean energy technology and innovation done in the United States. That's the task before our country.
Yeah.
But my message to all sides of politics is this: if we want this country to decarbonise, we need policy certainty.
One final question. The Productivity Commission report we saw on Friday, do you think that Productivity Commission report is at odds on IR with this government? The Productivity Commission report seemed to want to put more power in the hands of employers, whereas this government is going down the path, as you know, from the Jobs Summit, a very different path when it comes to IR.
Well, I think they were particularly critical of the multi-employer bargaining, which we have been as well, because we don't believe that's a solution to higher wages. I think when you look at the very long Productivity Commission report, there's a very simple message in this. We have the levers to make ourselves more productive. Investment, regulation, making sure that it's easier to employ people, easy to make sure that we get the most potential out of people, invest in their skills. It's a big report. But a simple message is this: the sustained path to sustained wage increases is to lift our level of productivity, which is as low as it's been in 60 years. And what does that mean? In the last decade, we've had the lowest rate of increase in living standards for the last 60 years. That's what it means for real Australians. That's really the nub of that report last week. There's a big to-do list there. We encourage the government to do as much of that to-do list as possible.
Jennifer Westacott, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.